What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you something a little bit different with Against the Storm. A roguelite city builder with a dark fantasy spin that was a lot more compelling than I initially thought it would be. Now, this game launches in full from early access on December 8th, and the reason I'm bringing you this video, which is the full version of the game, is that the developer contacted me to give me a copy of it ahead of its release to take a look at if I wanted to, and the reason I did, despite it not being something I would normally cover, is that the name sounded very familiar. So a quick Google search later, and I remembered that this is a game that launched into early access at the end of last year that had a fair amount of buzz around it. I remember people talking about it, but again, it wasn't really something up my alley. Given that it's a quiet week this week, I wanted to give it a shot for myself, and I was pleasantly surprised, as it turns out that some of the things that kept me from playing city builders are remedied by them being a roguelite. But first, a little bit about the world. You see, Against the Storm takes place in a world that is ravaged by a cyclical storm that rolls in and wipes out everything outside of one city called the Smoldering City. In between the cycles of these storms, people are sent out into the surrounding areas to gather supplies, conduct research, gather what they need, and we, the player, take on the role of one of the Queen's viceroys, whose job it is to facilitate these expeditions and accomplish certain goals. So each time you build a city, it's a sort of temporary thing where you're effectively just completing a few orders, and doing all of them sort of wins the mission, so to speak, which then earns you various supplies that can be spent on the hub area, the Smoldering City, to permanently increase and upgrade what you're able to do. In addition to that, you do have a sort of player level that as you level it up, you'll unlock extra buildings and things that can happen on individual missions. Now, the game starts off with a tutorial to set some of this stuff up and sort of explain how some of the individual building mechanics work, after which you'll be shown the world map and how all of that plays out. So effectively, every cycle, you'll be given a procedurally generated world map around the Smoldering City, and long term, your goal is to collect various seal fragments to break the seal on further areas, allowing you to go out and explore more in what is potentially a solution to the Blight Storm. So where you choose to send an expedition on this said map will have all sorts of modifiers down to the terrain or other unique events that might be there, which will then affect your settlements that you're trying to build up and accomplish your goals with. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the settlements themselves. Some of this almost certainly works how you would expect it to if you've ever really messed around with these kinds of games, and then other parts of it are somewhat unique. Now, at a base level, you'll be given at the start, depending on the loadout you sent with the expedition, but you'll generally start with a few individual citizens, which can be one of 5 races: humans, beavers, lizards, harpies, or foxes, who will then get to work gathering resources via just chopping down trees, gathering food, etc. And then you set up other buildings that allow you to use those raw materials to produce other things, such as more advanced building materials, allowing you to build different buildings, all of which is in service of chasing down the individual orders for a specific settlement. That part's the sort of run-of-the-mill part. While you'll start in a relatively isolated place, surrounded by some manner of forest, though it depends on your terrain, your main goal will be cutting down these trees right away to get at the glades in between them. The glades will have special events in them in addition to just extra space for you. These can be things like resources, etc., but some of them are dangerous glades. They offer an event that needs to be completed quickly, which will usually have a pretty high reward, but can also lead to, say, the death of your villagers or the destruction of your town, which will of course set you back. And that's important because while you're not on a strict timer, at least depending on the difficulty anyway, the longer it takes you to complete orders, the higher your Queen's impatience becomes. And if that bar maxes out, you've effectively failed. Now, every time you complete an order, it pulls that timer back down a little bit, and on the normal difficulties, it's pretty relaxed. So in addition to managing all of those, I would say, more basic elements, it's also important to manage your individual builders, because each different species of villager has different requirements and preferences in order to be happy. The happier they are, the faster you can complete your mission, whereas if their resolve or general satisfaction with the situation plummets, it can lead to bigger problems. And you can keep them happy by essentially assigning each type to jobs and preferences that they enjoy. For instance, the cold-blooded lizards like to work in warm places, whereas humans like to be around inns and working with grain. And what's more, you have to house them, which for most can be done by simply building generic shelters, but as you advance through the game, you can find more unique settlements, if you will, designed for each individual race that meet their needs. And while these house less people overall, they do make that particular type of villager happier. So balancing their needs and how you are distributing the labor, so to speak, does matter. And as time passes, you'll occasionally be gifted things like cornerstones or newcomers, that is to say, new villagers being added just kind of randomly, and they'll bring some rewards with them, which is meant to simulate sort of ongoing supply lines from the smoldering city. Whereas cornerstones are important developments for an individual settlement. Say they resort to cannibalism, or they develop how to use nets, among any variety of other options. Now, the really interesting part to me is that all of this collectively per settlement will last maybe 20 to 30 minutes before you either succeed or fail at what you were trying to do. At which point, you're sort of just on to the next settlement, and if you succeed at building these, you'll again gather resources for the smoldering city, which then leads to more permanent buffs, which lets you progress the story, so to speak. And then, once you're out of resources, you'll eventually need to end the cycle, which calls in the Blight Storm to wipe out everything but the smoldering city, until you start again outside of course, the seals you've broken, giving you access to wider ranges of territory. So you put all of those various things together, and you have a game that surprised me quite a bit. I would say that Against the Storm combines a lot of gameplay elements that I otherwise wouldn't be interested in a very unique way that makes them more interesting. So while I wouldn't have thought to combine a roguelite with a city builder, it really does work, and I had a lot of fun playing it, which is why I'm bringing you this video. But that's pretty much going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed a look at something a little bit different from what I normally cover, but given that it's a relatively quiet week as far as video games go for once, I thought it would be fun to check it out. But by all means, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know how you feel about this one down in the comment section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.